In today's episode, we'll be following Phil Hellmuth on World Series of Poker Europe with a buy-in of €10,450. There are only 3 players left. The blinds are 30,000 and 60,000, and the ante is 10,000. Hellmuth, the chip leader at the table, has 2 jacks, which is a huge hand three-handed, and he decides to limp pre-flop. He could easily raise, but both opponents are short stacks, and unless they have a big hand, they'll fold. The purpose of the limp is to either get raised, or assuming the small blind folds, to play against the big blind from position with jacks. The small blind Albertini raises to 235,000 and the big folds. Now Hellmuth can easily raise, but because Phil has 3 times the amount of Albertini's chips, he knows that Albertini might fold to his raise, which would be for all of his remaining chips. Albertini could have raised pre-flop with king-queen, ace-jack, pocket sevens, sixes, and so on. With those hands, if Phil raises, Albertini might fold, where if he has a better hand than Phil's, or ace-king, ace-queen, pocket tens, or nines, he'll probably shove. So in most cases, if Phil gets called, it will be by a better hand or a coin flip, besides of course pocket tens or nines. Phil knows that Albertini prefers to save his chips for a better spot, especially when he's short stack with only 3 players left, unless he has a big hand. With that in mind, Phil decides to call. On the flop, Albertini checks. Now after raising pre-flop 3-handed, where's the continuation bet? Most of the time when a player checks in this spot, especially when there are 3 small cards, it's because he has 2 big overs or he has aces or kings, and he knows that by the check he can disguise his big hand. Phil doesn't know if Albertini is trapping him in this spot or if he has 2 overs. So he decides to bet 350,000, which is a bit more than a value bet, indicating that he might have a decent hand but not a huge hand. Otherwise he'll probably bet less, making Albertini call with 2 overs. Albertini raises a 775,000, which is a kind of a min raise, well, a little bit more than that. As I've said in past episodes, this raise is very common when players have aces or kings, and they want to get called. If Albertini has queens, he might raise more and not let Phil call with just ace high, because if the ace shows up, he'll have to pay Phil, since Phil might try to bluff by representing the ace. In this spot, Phil can fold if he thinks Albertini has aces or kings. But as I mentioned, Phil has pocket jacks 3-handed, and if the opponent has aces or kings, so be it. Hellmuth can never fold in this spot with pocket jacks because in general, at each and every point in the hand, a player can have a better hand, unless you really have the nuts, which, as you know, are very rare. Now, if the opponent just has 2 overs, he might continue firing on the turn. Bear in mind that after his raise, he's behind almost 1.5 million. So with the 2 over cards, there's a bigger chance that he'll continue firing on the turn than call a raise or an all-in on the flop. So in this case, it looks like just calling is a better move, and by that, Phil continues representing a marginal hand, and he can continue to keep disguising his hand, so he calls. On the turn, a 2 of diamonds shows up and Albertini checks. Now it looks like he doesn't have aces or kings but 2 overs, and he might give up unless he's going to hit one of them on the river. The pot is now over 2 million, so Phil would prefer to take the pot right now rather than give up a free card. The only bet he can bet is all in, because if he bets $1 million or a bit less, it's still for most of Albertini's chips and will look like he has a very big hand. If he shoves, Albertini might get suspicious and call with ace high, or he may also have a gut shot draw with a 3. Phil shoves and Albertini folded with his 2 overs.